Mercy was never the first law of wolf kingdoms, only the one sung in ceremonies when the torches were bright and the drums were loud enough to drown hunger. Bloodline, fertility, alliance, obedience. These were the currencies that kept gates open and names intact. Healing belonged to that same market, praised when a body rose, punished when one failed. Cordelia Ravencrest had spent 7 years learning plants by scent and pulse by touch. And in one night the worth of those years had been weighed against a dead future in Aluna's womb, and found cheaper than iron. They brought her to the border at dawn with 6 guards and no cloak. Frost silvered the cliff grass and reamed the links between her wrists until the chain burned colder than metal should. Her healer sigil, the carved ash medallion every sworn practitioner wore at the throat, had been ripped away so hard the skin there was still abraded. Her satchel was gone. Her name followed it. The Pack Beta stopped beside the boundary post and read the verdict from a waxed strip, as though he were announcing weather. By order of Ravencrest Command, the accused is stripped of standing, title, and blood protection. She is carrion beyond this marker. Cordelia tried to stand straight anyway. Her knees trembled, but she forced her chin up, looking at each guard in turn, men she had stitched after hunts, fed willow bark to through fever, sat with while their mates labored. None met her eyes for long. One spat near her boots. Another muttered, "Should have killed her clean." Beta Halric drove a heated brand against her forearm before she could brace, and pain ripped through her so sharply that the horizon went white for a breath. When sight returned, the flesh already carried the mark in angry lines. Oathbreaker. He stepped back, satisfied, and tossed the iron into a bucket of sleet with a hiss. She followed the Luna's orders, Cordelia said, voice raw but steady. I wrote the dosage in the ledger, 3 drops of Dreamleaf, 2 of blue valerian. You can test the bottle. Halric crouched until their faces were level. He smelled of leather oil and old blood. The bottle tested for moonbane residue. Then someone planted it. And why would anyone do that for a lowborn healer? His smile was small and practiced. The Luna lost her air. You touched her cup. Cause and consequence. Even pups understand that. He straightened and nodded to the guard with the chain. Fix her to the post, high enough that scavengers work for it. The shackle snapped around her left ankle, then around the rusted ring bolted into the boundary stake. Cordelia clenched her jaw until the lock clicked. I am not asking them to care, she thought, the words coming clear and immediate in the shocked silence inside her head. I am asking them to verify. Open the ledger. Compare seals. Smell the tincture yourself. This is simple. This is method. But nothing is simple now. They need a body to hold the fear, and my body is already here. If I beg, I become their story. If I scream, I become their proof. Keep breathing, keep counting. 4 in, 4 out. Keep one piece of yourself where they cannot reach it. Keep that, and survive the hour. An hour earlier, before first light broke over the eastern ridge, she had still believed evidence might matter. She had been dragged from the infirmary to the keep hall barefoot, palms streaked with comfrey mash, hair unbound. The Luna's chamberlain stood beside the dais with Cordelia's satchel already emptied at his feet. Jars lined up like incriminating witnesses. Confess and accept clean exile, he had said, voice almost gentle. Resist and face trial by silver in front of the whole pack. Trial by silver did not test truth. It tested how much agony a body could hold before it collapsed. Cordelia had looked toward High Healer Tamsin, her teacher, waiting for one word of correction. Tamsin did not correct anything. She looked at Cordelia the way one looked at mold on stored grain, practical and faintly disgusted. You compounded without supervision, she said. You were warned your hands run hot and imprecise under pressure. That lie struck harder than the chain. Tamsin had praised those same steady hands for years. Cordelia took one step toward the spread jars and pointed at the cracked glaze near a stopper. That one isn't mine. Ravencrest Infirmary uses blue wax, not black. Someone switched. Halric backhanded her across the mouth. Not hard enough to break bone, hard enough to split skin. Enough, he said. You will walk to the border now. They marched her through the lower market while shutters banged open for morning trade. Fishmongers paused mid-shout. Apprentices carrying flour sacks slowed to stare. A child on a doorstep asked, too loudly, "Is that the poison girl?" His mother pulled him behind her skirts and did not answer. At the north gate, Cordelia saw her chance, small and ugly, but real. A cartwheel hit a rut. 2 guards shifted, chains slackened at her wrists. She twisted, dropped, and drove her shoulder into Halrich's thigh, then ran uphill toward the birch cut with the chain clanging against her knees. Branches slapped her face. Wet earth sucked at her soles. Behind her, boots pounded and wolves barked commands in clipped bursts. She did not get far. A guard wolf in partial shift overtook her by the old watch cairn and knocked her sideways into shale. Air fled her lungs. Halrich hauled her up by the hair and dragged her the rest of the way to the border stake while she coughed dust and swallowed rage. "That was your clean chance," he said at the post, breath steaming. "Now you get the cliff wind and whatever comes hunting." He leaned close enough for her to feel his words against her cheek. "If Stormborn Patrol finds you first, they will think you were spying. If rogues find you first, they won't care what you were." Then he signaled the line to move out. Their boots and armor faded into fog. The sea far below the cliffs hammered itself against stone in relentless, indifferent beats. Cordelia tested the ankle lock until skin tore and stopped when dizziness rolled through her. She pressed her branded forearm against her stomach and forced her breathing back into rhythm. Dawn widened, pale and cold, and the stormborn horns she expected did not come. Minutes stretched. The fog thickened instead, moving low across the grass like a living thing. Then the birds went silent. A shape separated from the mist 30 paces out, enormous and black, shoulders nearly level with Cordelia's chest even on 4 legs, fur dense as night water, gait soundless over frost. When it lifted its head, amber bled through its irises with an old, steady fire that had nothing feral in it and nothing tame. The wolf stepped between her and the drop, blocking the cliff edge with its body, and fixed its gaze on the path her escorts had taken as though daring them to return. Cordelia forgot the pain in her arm, forgot the blood drying at her lip, forgot even to shiver. She had spent her life reading wounds, scents, tremors. Every instinct she owned narrowed to one impossible fact. The king's wolf had come before the king's guards. The wolf held that line of ground as if it had been carved for him, paws planted in the frost, head high, chest broad enough to block the wind coming off the cliff. Cordelia heard the patrol before she saw them, a clipped rhythm of boots and metal through fog, then the low blast of a horn from the Stormborn side. 4 figures emerged with spears angled forward and silver-threaded cloaks dark with sea mist. They stopped when they saw the animal at the post. "Stand down," one of them called, voice breaking on the second word. The wolf did not look at them. He looked at Cordelia, and the weight of that attention was not hunger, not threat, but command without noise. "Stay still. Breathe. Wait." She obeyed before she understood she was obeying. The lead guard took 1 step closer, then dropped to 1 knee. The others followed with a speed that was almost panicked. "Majesty," he said to the wolf, head bowed to the frozen ground, "we did not know you were on the line." "Majesty." Cordelia's throat tightened. Stories about Alpha King Xavier Stormborn had traveled farther than merchants, each one contradicting the last. Ruthless in war, silent in council, a ruler who negotiated peace only from a position of absolute force. None of those stories had mentioned this. A king in fur and fang appearing alone at dawn to stand between an exile and a cliff. The wolf finally moved, circling once around her as though mapping every wound by scent. He paused at her branded forearm. A deep sound rolled from him, not loud, but layered with a fury that made the kneeling guards press lower. Then he stepped back, and the change took him. It was not graceful. It was controlled violence turned inward, bone and muscle folding into a new arrangement with a series of hard, wet snaps that made Cordelia's own joints ache in sympathy. Fur withdrew. Hands emerged, large and scarred, claws receding but not entirely gone at the tips. A man straightened where the wolf had stood, bare from the waist up despite the cold, dark hair damp with fog, runic lines faint along his shoulders like old lightning trapped under skin. When he lifted his face, amber bled through his eyes before settling into a storm dark brown ringed with gold. "I am Xavier Stormborn," he said. His voice matched the wolf, deep and edged, every syllable paired to necessity. "You are under my protection while you stand on my border." No one had used the word protection for Cordelia in days. The sound of it almost hurt. She forced her tongue to work. Cordelia Ravencrest. Former healer. She glanced at the brand and did not hide it. Exiled as Oathbreaker. His gaze went to the letters burned into her arm. The muscles in his jaw tightened once. Former, according to whom? According to those who needed a culprit. The nearest guard shifted, uneasy. "Majesty, she is from Ravencrest. We should secure her and report to council before—" Xavier did not raise his voice. "Did I ask for counsel?" The guard's mouth shut immediately. Cordelia swayed as a wave of dizziness punched through her ribs. The cliff wind bit through her torn dress, and now that the danger of being left alone had fractured, pain rushed in to occupy the space. Her ankle throbbed, where the iron cuff had rubbed skin raw. Her arm burned. Her lips tasted of old copper and salt. Xavier caught the movement before she fell. He did not touch her yet. He crouched until they were level, his expression hard but intent, as if he were reading a difficult text he refused to misinterpret. "Were you dosed?" he asked. "No." She swallowed. "Branded, chained, run to exhaustion." A pause. "Not dosed." "Are you carrying concealed silver?" She gave a hollow, breathless laugh that surprised both of them. "If I were, I would have used it on the chain hours ago." For the first time, something almost like approval crossed his face. He stood and held out a hand toward the kneeling patrol captain without taking his eyes off her. "Bolt cutter." The captain passed a thick-handled iron cutter from his belt, and then froze when Xavier did not move to hand it over. The king stepped closer to Cordelia instead, blade and hinge black against his palm. Within minutes, more Stormborn soldiers appeared through the fog, then a pair of medics with stretchers, then 2 council aides in formal cloaks, all of them slowing to a wary half-circle when they saw her mark. She felt each stare like a thorn. Poisoner, spy, burden. The old litany returned so fast it made her nauseous. "I am cold and shaking and trying not to beg in front of strangers," she thought, present tense panic pressing at the back of her teeth. "I am one verdict away from disappearing again. If he hands me over, they will call it procedure. If he doubts me, I am done. Keep your back straight. Keep your voice level. Do not make yourself small so they can step over you easier." He said, "Protection. Let that mean something for one breath, then the next." Xavier turned his head enough to address the ring of watchers. "No one approaches her. No one scents her. No one speaks her name without my leave." The words landed like stones in water, rippling through the line of bodies. The patrol captain bowed lower. The council aides exchanged a quick look, calculating and alarmed. "Majesty," one aide said carefully, "Crown protocol requires containment of foreign exiles marked for treachery." "Then amend protocol," Xavier said. "This one is mine to assess." Mine. The single word struck Cordelia with a reaction she could not classify. Not possession, not exactly. Claim. Responsibility. Risk accepted in public. He looked back at her ankle shackle. The iron loop had been fastened through a rusted ring sunk into the border post, too close to bone for comfort. "This will hurt," he said. "I can cut the post and carry both, or split the cuff clean if you hold still." "Split it," she whispered. "Please." He knelt in the frost, king of 6 territories with both knees on frozen ground, and positioned the cutter around the hinge. His forearm brushed her calf as he adjusted his grip. Heat pulsed beneath her skin at the contact, sudden and sharp, startling enough that she sucked in a ragged breath. His head snapped up. Their eyes met for a fraction of a second, and tension tightened between them like a drawn wire. The cutter bit down. Metal screamed. The cuff opened. The world changed shape. Warmth slammed through Cordelia in a bright, violent surge, not from outside but from marrow outward, as if a hidden pulse had awakened and found an answering beat directly in front of her. Scent sharpened with terrifying precision. Cedar, rain-struck stone, ozone after lightning, and beneath all of it the unmistakable signature of the wolf who had stood guard over her in the fog. Sound narrowed to his heartbeat, heavy and uneven now, and the rasp of his breath as he reeled back one step like a man struck in the chest. Xavier's claws pushed half free from his fingers. Amber flooded his irises, the predator surfacing in plain view. He dragged in a sharp breath through his teeth. "Out!" he growled, voice rougher than before. "Clear the line. Now." No one argued. Guards and aides backed away at once, then further, then vanished into fog with the medics and stretchers in a frantic blur of obedience. The captain pulled the last soldier by the sleeve, eyes wide, and the border fell abruptly silent except for wind and sea and the ragged cadence of 2 people trying to stand inside something enormous. Cordelia gripped the post to keep from collapsing. Her knees trembled so hard she thought they might fail anyway. The air between them felt charged, dense with a pressure that was not fear, but recognition so complete it bordered on pain. No, not now. Not him. Her instincts sharpened until every nerve seemed awake at once. Relief and humiliation collided with a fierce, unwanted hunger to step closer. Distrust rose just as fast. This man was a king. Kings weighed people by use. Her body did not care. Her body leaned toward him as if a thread had been tied from her sternum to his hand and pulled taut. "I cannot survive this if it is a trick," she thought, each word immediate, unfiltered, present, and raw. "I cannot survive wanting the one person with power to end me, but this is real. I know the scent of lies, the sweat of deceit, the sour edge of fear. This is none of those. This is recognition at the level of bone. I hate that I know it. I hate that I want to step into it anyway." Xavier braced one hand on the boundary post, knuckles whitening. For an instant his control fractured, and Cordelia saw the depth under it. Hunger held on a chain. Old loneliness turned into discipline. A ruler who had spent so long being unassailable that he no longer remembered how to be touched without armor. From his side of the bond, the shock was no gentler. Centuries of command had trained him to categorize threats in a single glance, but nothing in law, war, or ritual had prepared him for the precise certainty that the branded exile swaying in front of him was his mate. The word rose from the oldest part of him with brutal clarity. Not advantageous. Not convenient. True. He forced his claws back with visible effort and lifted both empty hands, palms out, showing he would not seize her. "Cordelia," he said, and her name in his mouth sounded almost reverent, almost disbelieving. "Look at me." She already was. Their gaze locked, and the thread between them tightened into something luminous and undeniable. Fear did not vanish. Neither did doubt. They stood inside both, breathing through it. 2 wounded sovereignties meeting on a line meant for exile. Wind drove fog around them in pale sheets. Somewhere behind the mist, storm-born watch bells began to ring, one after another, announcing a border incident to a waking court. Xavier did not look away. "You are freezing," he said quietly. "You are coming with me." Cordelia's fingers loosened from the post by degrees. "As a prisoner?" His answer came without hesitation. "As my mate, if you will let me earn the right to say it aloud." Cordelia held his gaze while the wind cut through the torn hem at her knees and the bond throbbed like a second heartbeat between them. "If," she said, each letter scraped raw, "you mean that, then earn it." The corner of his mouth tightened. Not quite relief, not quite pain. "I do." Her legs gave out anyway. Xavier moved fast but not possessive, catching her under the elbows instead of pulling her against his chest. "I need to carry you," he said. "Tell me yes." The request, spoken in that rough command voice but shaped like consent, struck her harder than the cold. In Ravencrest, hands came first and permission later. "Yes," she whispered. He lifted her with startling care, one arm beneath her knees, the other braced behind her shoulders, so her branded forearm stayed uncovered and untouched. When the patrol captain reappeared through the fog with 2 cloaks and a medic kit, he stopped short at the sight of Cordelia in the king's arms and swallowed whatever protocol he had planned to recite. "Majesty, the royal infirmary is prepared." "No," Xavier said. "Old observatory ward. Fewer corridors, fewer eyes." The captain hesitated. "The council will object." "Then they can object while she stays alive." They crossed the boundary line at a brisk pace, Xavier's stride eating distance over slick stone and frost-silvered grass. The storm-born border keep rose from the cliff ridge in black basalt tiers, banners snapping in sea wind, wolf sigils stitched in iron thread. Cordelia had never been this close to the fortress. She expected triumph carved into every wall. Instead, she found practicality. Narrow windows angled for weather, broad terraces built for watch rotations, smoke vents placed where crosswinds carried ash away from sleeping quarters. Her body registered each detail and then dropped it, overrun by fever and the bond's relentless pull. She could feel him like heat at her back, even where he did not touch. Shame tightened her throat. Need sharpened right behind it. I am exhausted, cold, and tied to him by something my mind cannot sort into safe categories. I want to trust the way starving people want bread, and that is exactly why I should be careful. Want is not proof. Hunger is not evidence. But he asked before he lifted me. He kept his hands where I could see them. He chose a side entrance instead of parading me through his court. I know coercion. I know the scent of men who confuse power with entitlement. He smells like restraint. Iron control with grief braided through it. If this is strategy, it is the strangest one I have ever seen. If it is real, then my old map of the world is already burning. At the inner gate, a pair of sentries straightened. One reached for the iron collar hanging from his belt, standard containment for foreign wolves in custody. Xavier did not slow. "Put that away." "Majesty, she is branded Ravencrest. She is hypothermic. She is injured. And she is under my word. Put it away." The sentry obeyed at once, color draining from his face. They climbed a spiral stair cut into the observatory tower's base and entered an infirmary that smelled of clean linen, juniper smoke, and old stone warmed by banked coals. Shelves lined the curved walls, stocked with labeled jars, rolled bandages, copper instruments, and bundles of dried herbs tied in neat loops. It was not luxurious, but it was meticulous. Cordelia felt a tiny, involuntary surge of professional respect. Xavier laid her on the nearest bed, then stepped back far enough that she could breathe without his scent flooding every thought. "Who staffs this ward?" A gray-haired medic looked up from a mortar. "I do, Majesty. Malin of Eastwatch." "Report to me directly. No one enters without my leave. Not council, not nobility. No exceptions." Malin's gaze flicked to Cordelia's brand, then to Xavier's face. "Understood." He turned back to Cordelia, lifted the fur-lined cloak from his own shoulders, and draped it over her without touching skin. "May I check your wrist pulse?" She nodded. His fingers settled lightly over the inside of her wrist, careful and steady. He counted in silence, eyes narrowed in concentration rather than dominance, then reached for a cup on the tray Malin had set down. Before handing it to Cordelia, he drank first, a deliberate swallow, then another. "You think someone would poison a patient in your own keep?" she asked, voice thin. "I think someone has already tried to make your hands carry a crime you did not commit. Caution is cheap." He offered the cup again. She took it. Malin approached with salve and clean cloth. Xavier held out his hand for both, and the medic passed them over with a tiny, startled nod. He knelt at bedside, jar open, cloth folded, gaze fixed on Cordelia's face. "Your forearm first," he said, "then ankle abrasion. I need to clean the brand edges. It will sting." "Do I have permission?" "Yes." He worked with infuriating gentleness, cleaning burned skin in small circles, pausing each time her breath hitched, waiting until she nodded before continuing. He did not flinch from the angry letters stamped into her arm. He did not soften them with false comfort either. He simply treated what was there, as if pain deserved method and dignity. When he reached the ankle wound, he paused again. "This scar on your calf," he said quietly, fingertips hovering but not landing, "is old. May I?" She stared at him. "You ask about old scars too?" "I ask about all scars." A laugh escaped her, hoarse and unsteady. "That is inconveniently decent." For a blink, humor warmed his expression, brief and almost boyish beneath the king. "I have been called worse." By midday, fog had burned off the cliffs, and winter light poured through the observatory's high windows in long, pale bars that turned dust into drifting silver. Cordelia woke from a fever doze to find Xavier seated on a low stool by her bed, forearms braced on his knees, palms spread gently over her sternum through the blanket. The contact was grounding, measured to her breath. When panic fluttered her pulse, his hand steadied. When she settled, he loosened pressure. He did not seem to notice she was awake until her fingers shifted under the cloak. He withdrew immediately. "You spiked to 102, shivering hard. This regulated your breathing. You stayed?" "Yes." She studied him in the clearer light. He was still bare-armed, runic marks faint along his skin, not decorative, but earned. Old bite scars laddered one shoulder. A fresh nick crossed his knuckles, probably from forcing claws back at the border. Nothing in him looked effortless. Everything looked held together by discipline. "Most kings would have put me in irons and called it prudence," she said. "Most kings are not me." "And you are not afraid this bond is leverage? A trap?" His jaw flexed. "I am afraid of many things. Not that." Silence settled, dense but not hostile. Then he reached into his belt and set a small object on the blanket near her hand. Her herb knife. Bone handle, narrow steel blade, tiny notch near the tip where she had once snapped it cutting root too quickly. She froze. "Where did you get this?" "From the Ravencrest confiscation chest that came with their accusation packet. I had my quartermaster open it in front of witnesses." He slid the knife closer with one finger. "If you were my prisoner, I would not return a blade." Cordelia wrapped her hand around the familiar weight and felt a wall inside her crack, not collapse, but fracture along old fault lines. She had been disarmed, renamed, and displayed like evidence. Someone had finally handed her back a tool and called it trust. Xavier watched her close her fingers around the knife and spoke more quietly than before. "I have not felt a mate bond in centuries. I do not know how to do this perfectly. I know command, strategy, loss. I know how to keep people alive at distance. Closer than that, I am learning." His gaze held hers, unguarded in a way that made her chest ache. "I will not use the bond to take what you have not offered." The room went very still. "I am listening for the hidden hook, the price buried under gentleness, the clause that will turn this into debt. I keep waiting for the old pattern, protection as possession, kindness as a prelude to control. It does not arrive." He admits uncertainty instead of pretending mastery. He gives me a weapon and calls it mine. He tells me what he cannot promise and what he can. That honesty is terrifying because it asks me to choose, and choice means responsibility. If I step toward him, I am not being dragged. If I stay, I am not trapped. I have wanted safety so long I forgot safety includes agency. Maybe trust is not a gate flung open all at once. Maybe it is this: one clear action, then another, until your body stops bracing for the blow that does not come. A knock sounded at the infirmary door. Malin entered with 2 guards and a folded vellum writ sealed in black wax. "Majesty," she said carefully, "first court is assembled. Lady Genevieve Darkhollow petitions immediate hearing on the Ravencrest exile. She cites contamination risk and crown succession concern." Xavier stood in one fluid motion. The softness left his face. The king returned whole. "Tell court I am coming." Malin hesitated. "They requested the woman be brought in chains." "No." His voice dropped, carrying the quiet force of a storm front. "She walks beside me." The great hall of Stormborn Keep was built like a throat of stone, high-vaulted and resonant, banners of allied packs hanging between carved pillars. By the time Xavier and Cordelia entered from the observatory passage, every bench was full. Nobles in fur-trimmed formal wear, officers in dark leathers, healers, quartermasters, clerks with ink-stained fingers, even kitchen staff clustered near the back doors. Whispers moved through them like dry leaves catching wind. Poisoner, border stray, oathbreaker. Genevieve Darkhollow stood near the front in silver-gray silk and onyx beads, posture flawless, expression arranged into concerned nobility. She was striking in the way sharpened glass was striking. At her left, 2 council allies held legal writs stamped with 3 different house seals. The presiding elder rose. By tradition, foreign-branded exiles face trial by silver before formal integration or execution. We move to begin. A murmur of assent rolled through the hall. Cordelia felt heat drain from her hands. Trial by silver. Public agony disguised as jurisprudence. Her grip tightened on the knife hidden in her sleeve. Genevieve inclined her head toward Xavier, voice smooth as polished stone. "Majesty, no one questions your compassion, but sentiment cannot supersede stability. The woman is already linked to 1 fatal miscarriage and now to bond irregularity. If there is corruption, we must purge it at once." Cordelia heard the deliberate stress on woman, as if she did not deserve a name. Xavier stepped down from the throne dais instead of taking his seat. The movement snapped conversation in half. He crossed the floor and stopped at Cordelia's side, close enough that his shoulder nearly brushed hers, not shielding from in front, but aligning beside. "Ancient King Law, Article 9, he said, voice carrying to the rafters. "Any accusation against the king's recognized mate constitutes accusation against the crown itself. Proceedings escalate to sovereign review. No silver trial permitted until evidentiary audit is complete." One of Genevieve's allies lifted a writ. "Recognition is contested. There are procedures for false bonds, for enchantment, for blood manipulation." The ally took 2 steps forward. Xavier's eyes shifted, predator surfacing in a sweep of molten amber that lit the hall's shadowed edges. Power rolled off him in a controlled wave, an alpha aura so dense the nearest benches creaked as bodies dropped to their knees in reflexive submission. The writ-bearer hit stone mid-step, palms splayed, breath punched from his lungs. Around the room, officers bowed their heads. Nobles followed, some unwilling, all compelled. Cordelia remained standing. The contrast struck her like lightning without flame, a room full of rank bent by force, and 1 branded exile left upright by choice. Xavier did not look away from the kneeling noble. "You will approach her only when invited." He turned toward the archivist table at the hall's right flank. "Master Archivist Ilian, unseal all Ravencrest medical ledgers submitted in this case. Chain of custody, seal records, apothecary inventories, dosing logs, public reading. Tonight." Ilian blanched. "Those archives are restricted by Interpack Treaty." "Then I revoke restriction under Emergency Health Authority." Genevieve's composure fractured for the first time, a tiny tightening around the eyes. Majesty, with respect, exposing private healer records could inflame panic across territories. Panic thrives in shadows, he said. Truth does not. She pivoted toward Cordelia then, smile gone. You stand very straight for someone facing judgment. Tell me, healer, did Ravencrest teach you to counterfeit innocence as neatly as tinctures? The insult was intended to make Cordelia flinch. Instead, she heard her own voice answer, low and even. Ravencrest taught me dosage ratios and wound drainage. They taught me how quickly power blames the nearest woman when bloodline plans fail. A rustle spread through the hall. Genevieve's nostrils flared. Xavier's hand hovered near Cordelia's back, not touching. You will be addressed by name in this court, he said to Genevieve, or not speak. Genevieve inclined her head again, too smooth, too controlled. As you command, Majesty. But her gaze on Cordelia promised this was not finished. The elder cleared his throat, still kneeling. Sovereign Review acknowledged. Interim status of Cordelia Ravencrest? Xavier answered without pause. Protected witness under Crown authority. No restraints. No silver exposure. Quarters in observatory ward under my seal until audit concludes. He turned slightly, finally meeting Cordelia's eyes in the charged silence. Do you consent to remain under that protection while we open the records? She had expected ownership. He offered terms. Her guard did not fall all at once. It lowered by one deliberate notch. I consent, she said, and I will testify to every formula I ever mixed. His expression softened by a degree only she could see. Then we proceed together. For the first time since the chain closed on her ankle at dawn, Cordelia believed those words might be true. The court did not break so much as fracture into controlled chaos. Clerks hurried toward the archive vault with ringed key chains clattering at their belts. Officers took up positions at every door, and nobles knelt just long enough to obey the king before rising with resentment visible in every rigid shoulder. Genevieve remained where she stood, still and polished, while movement swirled around her like water around stone. As Xavier guided Cordelia toward the side corridor, Genevieve spoke softly to Council Elder Marrow without turning her head. If Sovereign Review delays purification, we will need emergency regency language drafted tonight. Stability must be personified, not debated. Marrow murmured back. You believe he can be compelled? He can be cornered, Genevieve said. There is a difference. Cordelia caught only those fragments, but the intent under them was clear enough to tighten her spine. This was not wounded pride. This was architecture. Genevieve was not merely trying to humiliate a rival. She was trying to redefine the bond as a constitutional defect and then offer herself as cure. Xavier's hand hovered at Cordelia's back as they entered the records gallery, a circular chamber beneath the keep with slate tables and bronze lampstands. Scribes lined up sealed packets by territory: Ravencrest, Darkhollow, East Watch, the Neutral Infirmary Guild. Master Archivist Ilian broke the first wax seal under witness and unrolled a dosing ledger with gloved fingers. Entry 72, he read. Luna Sedative Protocol, prepared by healer Cordelia Ravencrest. Dreamleaf 3 drops, Blue Valerian 2. That part is correct, Cordelia said. Ilian continued. Amended notation 3 hours later. Additional Moonbane half-drop for uterine retention. Cordelia's voice sharpened. I never wrote that. Genevieve stepped in from the doorway, 3 nobles flanking her. Your denial is expected. Ink does not share your loyalty. Ilian angled the page toward the lamp. Xavier stood beside Cordelia, not touching, but near enough that the bond hummed against her nerves. Under brighter light, the amendment looked almost convincing. Same slanted hand, same pressure at the tail of each letter. Almost. Cordelia leaned forward until she could smell the iron in the ink. That line was copied from my old entries, she said. But the writer pulled each downstroke on the exhale. I write on held breath when I chart dosages. See the tremor here and here? That is imitation, not habit. One of Genevieve's allies gave a thin smile. Now she offers calligraphy mysticism. Not mysticism, Cordelia said. Muscle pattern. Xavier addressed Ilian. Cross-check with her apprenticeship journals. Ilian nodded and sent 2 scribes running. Genevieve folded her hands, gaze settling on Cordelia's branded arm with cool disdain. Majesty, if every accused healer may dismiss records as forged, law becomes theater. Xavier looked at her, expression unreadable. Law without verification is theater. The next packet opened, then the next. With each unsealed scroll, the pattern grew less subtle. Altered timestamps, duplicate inventory marks, tincture requests signed by people who had been off shift, dangerous because it was precise, bureaucratic, and deniable at each small point. Taken separately, every discrepancy could be called a clerical error. Taken together, it looked like a hand moving through multiple departments with confidence and access. By the time the 4th ledger was opened, night had settled against the high windows, and the lamps had been trimmed twice. Cordelia's headache throbbed behind her eyes, but she kept reading, naming each herb ratio and binder from memory. Xavier had a tray sent down. He ate first from her bowl again, then passed it to her without comment. The gesture drew stares from every noble still lingering in the chamber. Genevieve watched that exchange with a smile too slight to challenge and too deliberate to ignore. Your devotion does you credit, Majesty, yet kingdoms do not survive on devotion, they survive on airs and predictability. There it was, finally spoken in full view. What she wanted. A queen selected by treaty, womb by contract, throne by arithmetic. If Cordelia could be framed as a contaminant, the bond could be recast as an emergency, and emergency powers could force a ceremonial union that benefited houses already allied to Darkhollow. When Xavier answered, his voice was calm enough to chill the room. My line is not a market, Lady Genevieve. Her expression held. Her eyes hardened. Everything is a market when winter stores are low. That was when Cordelia understood why Genevieve was dangerous. She did not need to win affection. She needed to manufacture necessity. An hour later, Cordelia and Xavier climbed back to the observatory infirmary with a stack of copied pages under seal. Malin banked the fire and left them alone at Xavier's request. The tower room felt smaller at night, lit by coals and 2 oil lamps, their shadows moving across old star charts painted on curved stone walls. Xavier set the documents on the table. You should sleep. I should finish the contamination map. You are shaking. I am angry. A brief pause, then he gave a rough exhale that might have been the beginning of a laugh. That too. She sat anyway, spreading pages in rows and marking links with charcoal. Apothecary requisitions to household kitchens, kitchen entries to cistern maintenance rosters, cistern rosters to guard rotations assigned by seal, not by captain's signature. She had spent years being treated as hands without authority. Now those same habits of precision were turning into a blade. Xavier stood across from her, reading over her shoulder. His presence pressed warm and steady at the edge of her awareness. When she reached for a different sheet, their fingers brushed. Heat flared up her wrist. She pulled back too quickly, knocking a vial of lamp oil that he caught mid-fall. Still not used to it, she said. Neither am I. Silence settled, dense and intimate. She was exhausted enough to lean into him and frightened enough to keep a full arm of distance, and both were true at once. She felt him even when he was still, as if her pulse had learned a second rhythm and kept checking whether it was nearby. This would have been easier if he had been cruel. Cruelty was familiar. Cruelty gave instructions: brace, shrink, survive, detach. He asked. He waited. He listened when she named a fact. Desire was the least frightening part. Trust was the part that could dismantle her if she built it wrong. Yet each hour with him added one more data point she could not dismiss. He did not seize openings. He did not punish disagreement. He let her keep her knife beside her plate. If this was a snare, it was built from respect, and that was almost unbearable because it was what she had wanted before she stopped admitting she wanted anything. He moved around the table and crouched so they were eye level. "Tell me what you need from me in the next 6 hours." The question, practical and unadorned, steadied her more than comfort would have. Access to the confiscation chest, full chain of custody names, and your authority to interview kitchen runners without house supervisors present. You have all three. He rose. I will have the chest brought here. As if summoned by intent, a knock sounded. Captain Sarek entered with 2 guards carrying a lockbox, iron-banded and stamped with Ravencrest wax. Sarek bowed to Xavier, then looked at Cordelia with a measured politeness that did not reach his eyes. "Recovered evidence chest, Majesty, logged and untouched since border transfer." Cordelia's focus dropped to the guards behind him. Stormborn cloaks, correct sigils, wrong fastening. Both had clasped their wolf brooches on the left shoulder. Stormborn military protocol fixed rank clasps on the right to keep spear arms clear. She had seen it on every sentry in the keep. Then scent hit her. Faint but distinct under woolen smoke. Cedar resin cut with iron root oil, a dark hollow estate preservative used on leather scabbards. She kept her face neutral and stepped close enough to Xavier that she could murmur without being heard. "Those 2 are not your regular detail. Wrong clasp side, dark hollow oil on their boots." His eyes sharpened. "Are you certain?" "Yes." He did not turn his head. "Captain Sarek, thank you. Leave the chest and go." Sarek hesitated a fraction too long, then bowed again and withdrew with the guards. Xavier waited until their footsteps faded before crossing to the door and locking it himself. "Say it again," he said. She repeated every detail. He listened without interruption, then went to the writing desk and penned 3 quick orders with his signet pressed in black wax. When he handed them to Malin through the hatch, his voice was flat steel. "Quiet reassignment of West Corridor guards. Replace cistern watch at once. No announcement." He closed the hatch and faced Cordelia. "You may have just prevented something." "Or accelerated it," she said. "Both can be true." They opened the confiscation chest. Inside, her old jars lay wrapped in cloth, labels intact. Cordelia uncorked the first and inhaled. Chamomile, clean. Second, valerian and mint. Third jar, dreamleaf with a bitter trace beneath it that raised every hair on her arms. "Moonbane," she said. Xavier swore under his breath. "It is fresh," she added. "Not from my old stock. Someone dusted the rim recently so it would transfer to hands and records alike." He looked at her. Anger leashed so tightly it seemed to vibrate in his throat. "Can you prove timing?" "If I heat a sample under moonfire, yes. Residue age changes the vapor color." He moved toward the door. "Then we do it now." 3 hours after moonrise, the first scream rose from below. Not fear. Pain. Another followed, then the crash of crockery and the thud of bodies hitting stone. A bell began hammering from the great hall, not ceremonial cadence but emergency strikes in rapid sets of 4. Malin burst through the infirmary door breathless, braid half loose. "Majesty, multiple collapses at evening meal," she said. "Convulsions, vomiting, claw spasms. Kitchen staff and 2 junior officers. Healers are calling toxin exposure." From the corridor, voices surged into panicked overlap. She touched the evidence chest and now people are dropping. "Ravencrest sedative profile, I swear it." "Seal the tower before she runs." Cordelia was already moving, grabbing her knife and the jar she had flagged. Xavier caught her wrist, not hard, just enough to stop her for 1 heartbeat. "It may be targeted at you," he said. "Stay behind my guard." "No." Her voice came out sharper than she intended. "If this is wolfsbane dilution, every minute costs muscle and breath. They need identification and countermix now." His jaw clenched. The bond snapped tight with fear from both directions, fierce and immediate. Then he released her wrist. "Together," he said. They ran. The stairwell corkscrewed down into noise and heat. By the time they reached the great hall, bodies lay on rush mats between overturned benches, limbs jerking in painful arcs, while healers tried to keep jaws clear and airways open. Water pitchers had been kicked across the floor, their contents pooling under torchlight. The smell told Cordelia everything at once: bitter alkaloid, iron root binder, winter cistern mineral trace. Genevieve stood near the dais, hand over her mouth in a perfect tableau of horror, and turned as Xavier and Cordelia entered. "This is her work," she said, loud enough to carry to every corner. She had access to compounds and crown kitchens within hours. How many must suffer before you restrain her? The crowd surged, frightened and furious. 2 guards pushed forward through the crush with shackles ready. Xavier's voice cracked across the hall like a whip. "Stand down." Neither guard moved. Cordelia saw their left shoulder clasps, smelled cedar and iron root again. Critical understanding landed cold and clean. The poisoning was no longer a frame in ledgers. It was active, public, and already inside the keep's water. She stepped onto the lowest dais stair so everyone could see her, and raised the contaminated jar high above her head. "Moonfire braziers," she shouted. "In the center, now. If you want them alive, you let me test this in front of all of you." For a suspended beat, no one moved, as if the hall itself had forgotten how to obey a new voice. Then Genevieve stepped forward, silk whispering over stone, and pointed at Cordelia with a hand that did not tremble. "You hear how quickly she commands," she said, projecting grief and outrage in equal measure. "A foreign exile enters our keep, handles contraband, and moments later our people are writhing on the floor. This is not medicine. This is theater to hide guilt." The 2 guards with left shoulder clasps advanced again, shackles raised. Cordelia did not step down. "If you shackle me now, you choose panic over proof." "Proof?" Genevieve's smile sharpened. "You have none." Xavier mounted the dais stairs in 2 strides and stopped 1 step below Cordelia, placing himself where the entire court could see his profile and hers together. When he spoke, his voice carried through the clamor without strain. "Moonfire braziers, center hall, healer tables clear. Anyone obstructing this right obstructs Crown emergency response." The nearest officers snapped into motion at once, dragging iron braziers into a circle between the fallen. Coals spilled sparks as they were set down and fanned bright. Healers shoved platters, cups, and account tablets aside to create a work surface. The 2 suspicious guards hesitated, looked toward Genevieve, then backed off with visible reluctance. Less than 10 minutes after the first collapse, the Great Hall had become a field laboratory under torchlight and fear. Cordelia jumped down from the stair and landed hard enough to jar her ankle, then kept moving. "Malin, I need clean water from sealed casks, not pitchers. 2 mortars. Fresh dreamleaf, blue valerian, wolfsbane sample from the symptomatic vomitus basin, and iron root scrapings if anyone has leather preservative stores." Malin was already barking orders. Genevieve folded her arms. "You expect us to trust a blood rite performed by the accused? I expect you to watch." Cordelia set the contaminated jar on the table, uncorked it, and held it over the first moonfire flame. Bitter vapor curled up, green-gray at the edges. She angled it toward the nearest physician. "Moonbane dust on a rim burns dull and dirty. That is planted residue." She reached for a second bowl and began measuring drops by sight, hands steady despite the roar in her ears. "This is the sedative formula I charted for the Luna. Dreamleaf, blue valerian, no alkaloid spike." She warmed it over flame. The vapor rose pale silver, almost clear. A murmur moved through the crowd. Now she added tiny pinches from the basin sample the healers had collected from a convulsing officer. "This is what is in your victims." Over flame, the vapor surged dense blue-black. Several medics cursed under their breath. Cordelia raised her voice. "Not the same profile, not my sedative. This carries wolfsbane diluted with mineral water and bound with iron root oil so the bitterness hides behind cistern stone." Genevieve laughed once, brittle. Anyone can mix smoke and claim revelation. Cordelia met her stare. Then I will show lineage. She pulled her herb knife, turned her palm up, and sliced a shallow line across the heel of her hand. Blood welled, bright against skin. She let 3 drops fall into the bowl, then stirred with a copper pin. The liquid hissed, and the scent intensified, dragging metallic and resin notes into sharp relief. Present tense flooded her mind with hard clarity. I am not asking permission to exist in this room. I am not pleading with people who decided my guilt before my voice reached them. I know this craft. I know the way toxins behave when heat, blood, and binder meet. They can call me outcast, liar, contaminant. But the mixture will still reveal what it is. Fear is loud. Method is patient. Keep speaking facts. Keep your hand steady. Let them watch every step so no one can rewrite it later. She held the bowl out toward the front benches. Ravencrest blood sense reacts to estate binders. Ironroot from neutral guild stores smells flat. Ironroot from Dark Hollow curing rooms carries cedar resin and black salt. This sample carries both. The hall went still enough that the crack of brazier coals sounded like snapped twigs. Genevieve's composure thinned at the edges. A convenient accusation. Cordelia wiped her palm on a clean cloth and turned to Xavier. The scent trail is strongest in service corridors, not kitchens. Whoever dosed the water used the maintenance path. I go with you, he said. She shook her head once. If you leave the hall, she controls the narrative here. Keep witnesses in place. Lock the doors. I will bring the source. Danger flashed across his face, immediate and unhidden. Cordelia. She wants me hidden or silenced. I choose visible. A beat of conflict passed through him. Then he nodded to 2 guards at the east pillar, both with right shoulder clasps and Stormwolf insignia scuffed from real patrol use. You move when she moves. You take commands from her until she returns. Genevieve lifted her chin. You are letting a suspect direct royal guard? Xavier's gaze went feral, ancient authority pressing into every corner. I am letting my mate save my people. Cordelia was already running. She cut through the side arch into the service passage, Malin's lantern light vanishing behind her as the corridor narrowed to damp stone and storage alcoves. The scent thread she had isolated in the bowl pulled her forward. Wolfsbane bitter, ironroot resin, and beneath both the expensive iris oil Genevieve favored at court. Her lungs burned by the second switchback, but she did not slow. At the cistern hatch, she found fresh scrape marks on the latch and a wax fleck stamped with Dark Hollow's thorn crest. She pocketed it and kept going, deeper into the lower tunnels where noble storage vaults lined the wall behind iron grates. One door stood out. Polished lockplate, no dust, and a new warding thread tied wrong for Stormborn script. Here, she said. The assigned guard reached for his keys. None fit. Cordelia took 1 step back and drove her boot at the lock seam. Pain shot up her leg. The seam held. She took the guard's short pry bar without asking and wedged it under the latch. On 3, push. Metal groaned. Again. On the second heave, the plate ripped free. She kicked the door inward and the vault opened to shelves of jars, sealed envelopes, and account ledgers bound in black twine. Not apothecary storage, operations. She grabbed the top ledger, flipped it open, and found lines of payments coded by initials and shift times. Beside one entry sat a pressed ring stamp impression, still dusted with pale green ash. Moonbane. She took the ledger, the stamp block, and 2 sealed letters marked for Captain Sarek, then turned and ran back up the corridor with guards pounding behind her. When they burst into the Great Hall, the tribunal had already reformed around the braziers. Victims lay stabilized on pallets, breathing ragged but no longer convulsing. Xavier stood at center, flanked by officers. Genevieve was speaking, voice rising. Temporary regency until contamination risk is eliminated. This is basic governance. Cordelia strode straight into the circle and threw the ledger onto the evidence table. It landed with a crack of leather on wood. "Govern this," she said. All eyes snapped to the book. Xavier did not touch it first. He looked at Cordelia's face, then at the blood on her palm, then gave one sharp nod to Ilian. "Read chain integrity." Ilian examined the torn lock plate and seal fragments she set beside the ledger. "Recovered from Lower Vault 12, registered to Dark Hollow Liaison Household," he said, voice unsteady. "Lock forced in presence of Crown Guards Halden and Roke." Genevieve's expression hardened into open contempt. "Fabricated." Cordelia opened the ledger and began reading aloud, each line clear enough to carry to the back wall. "Third night of Frostwane, payment to S for corridor access. Fifth night, payment to Kitchen Runner L for cistern key duplication. Seventh night, payment to 2 watchmen for clasp reversal and shift substitution. Ninth night, Moonbane procurement marked to private estate inventory, ring seal matching Dark Hollow Thorn." She held up the stamp block. Pale ash clung to the grooves. One kitchen runner near the benches made a strangled sound and stepped forward with both hands raised. "She ordered me," he blurted, pointing at Genevieve. "Night access, no log entry. Said it was for noble tonic cooling. I swear it." Another voice followed from the healer ranks. "I saw Dark Hollow crates near the cistern stairs after curfew." Genevieve turned on them, fury finally stripping away polish. "Cowards! You took coin and now whimper." She snapped her fingers at Captain Sarek, who stood near the west column. "Arrest Cordelia Ravencrest for treason and false evidence." Sarek did not move. Genevieve blinked. "Captain. Now." A different officer stepped out from behind Sarek's position, wearing captain bars and right clasp protocol. "Sarek was relieved 2 hours ago by Crown order," he said. "I am Captain Dane. Your commands hold no authority here." Shock flared across Genevieve's face, then curdled into rage. "He was supposed to be mine by blood and law." Her hand flashed to her hairpins. She ripped free a long silver pin and lunged for Cordelia's throat. Cordelia pivoted on instinct, caught Genevieve's wrist mid-strike, and turned the joint down and out in the exact lock used to immobilize delirious patients without breaking bone. Genevieve gasped and dropped to one knee, the pin clattering across a stone. At the same instant, Xavier's command crashed through the room, alpha power in every syllable. "Yield!" Genevieve's wolf surfaced in her eyes, and then stuttered under the force, pinned in place by rank and law. Xavier stepped forward, every line of him lethal and controlled. "You tried to murder my people and my mate." Genevieve bared her teeth. "She is nothing." Cordelia tightened the hold just enough to keep her down, and answered before Xavier could. "I am the one who stayed to save them." Silence followed, enormous and clean. Council Elder Marrow lowered himself to both knees. One by one, the rest of the council mirrored him. Ilian placed the ledger, stamp, seal fragments, and witness statements into a silver evidence tray and spoke the formal notation with a shaking voice. "Conspiracy to poison winter stores. Forgery of medical record. Attempted unlawful regency coercion. Attempted assault under tribunal." Xavier did not look away from Genevieve. By Crown authority and council witness, Genevieve Darkhollow is stripped of title, holdings, and court rank. Branded oathbreaker and exiled beyond warded borders under armed guard. She returns on Stormborn land only for execution. Dane signaled. 2 wardens stepped in, shackled Genevieve's wrists, and pulled her upright. She fought for one heartbeat, then went rigid, eyes locked on Cordelia with cold hatred and a thin seam of disbelief. Cordelia released the joint lock and stepped back, breathing hard, blood drying on her palm, the hall still watching her not as carrion, not as rumor, but as the woman who had dragged truth into open fire and refused to let it be buried again. Xavier crossed the space between them and took her bleeding hand in both of his, turning it palm up so the court could see the shallow cut she had used to prove them all wrong. His voice remained level, but the strain in it was no longer hidden. "Malin," he said, "bind this, then witness chain submission." Malin stepped forward at once. While she wrapped Cordelia's palm, Ilian began naming each item into the record slate, his words ringing through the hall with deliberate precision. The dark hollow ledger, the ring stamp with moonbane ash, the wax fleck from the cistern hatch, the 2 sealed letters addressed to Sarek, the forced lock plate from Vault 12, the contaminated jar from the confiscation chest, the amended Ravencrest dosing sheets, and the copied custody rosters showing class reversal substitutions. Dane added his own report, including the quiet guard reassignment executed from Xavier's black wax orders and Sarek's removal before the attempted arrest. Ilian added a cross-border writ to the slate. Ravencrest Infirmary Command and custody officers, including Halric and Tamsin by name, were summoned to joint tribunal for forged records and coerced exile process. Ravencrest's seal acknowledged receipt. Sarek tried to interrupt twice. The second time, Marrow told him to be silent in a voice that sounded older than stone. The loaded look Genevieve had given Marrow in the records gallery paid out in full when he bowed to Xavier and said, with no room left for ambiguity. The emergency regency language she requested was drafted but unsigned. I delayed it because the chain reports were inconsistent. That delay may have prevented a constitutional fracture. He did not ask forgiveness. He simply recorded the truth. By the time the last witness spoke, the hall had shifted around Cordelia, not softened, reordered. Xavier did not dismiss the court. He turned to her instead. "There is one right left," he said quietly, audible only to those nearest. "I will not complete it without your clear consent." They walked to the moonlit stone circle above the keep, where exiles were usually named and cast out. Tonight, the same ring held council, healers, guards, and kitchen workers shoulder to shoulder, their breath rising silver in the cold. Genevieve had already been marched beyond the inner gate under warded escort. Dane had posted trusted sentries at every tunnel and cistern hatch. Ilian carried the sealed evidence casket himself to the archive vault and returned with ash on his sleeves to prove it had been logged. The physical trail was closed, item by item, by witness and mark. Moonlight poured over the carved stones. Xavier stepped inside the circle and waited until Cordelia entered opposite him. Under pack law, he had every right to claim by rank. He chose something harder. He knelt first. A sharp intake moved through the watchers. Kings did not kneel in public unless they meant to change the shape of power. Xavier tipped his head, baring his throat where pulse beat steady under skin, and held both palms open. "If you choose me," he said, voice rough and reverent, "we mark as equals. If you say no, I remain your king and your shield, and no one will touch you without leave. I am yours to refuse." Cordelia stared at him and felt the old terror rise, not of him, but of wanting something this much and surviving if it broke. Present tense flooded her again, vivid and immediate. I am standing in the place where people were unmade, and he is offering me choice in front of everyone who once needed me small. My body remembers chains, my mind remembers ledgers, but my pulse knows his. He did not ask me to disappear for safety. He let me stand in fire and speak. If I step forward now, it is not surrender to a cage. It is a vow with my eyes open. She moved until her boots touched his knees and cupped his jaw, thumbs against the rough line of his beard. "Yes," she whispered. "I choose you." His breath caught. "Say it again." "Yes, Xavier, mine by choice." The word mine passed between them like a struck chord. He rose slowly, giving her time to step back if she wished. She did not. He touched her shoulder first, then waited. When she inclined her head, he bent to the junction of her neck and shoulder and closed his teeth with deliberate control, enough to break skin, never enough to tear. Pain flared bright, clean, immediate. Her hands fisted in his cloak. The circle vanished. There was only heat, pulse, and the hard certainty of being found. Then the pain turned. Warmth spread outward in widening rings through her chest, her spine, her fingertips, as if frozen rooms inside her were taking light one by one. His scent deepened against her skin, cedar and storm and living wolf, and the bond that had hummed raw at the edges locked into place, with startling calm. Not hunger, now. Home. Xavier drew back with blood on his mouth and eyes gone fully feral amber, then forced a breath and steadied. Yours, he said against her temple. Always yours. Mate, Cordelia answered by gripping the back of his neck and pulling him down. Hold still. A thin laugh broke from someone in the outer ring, brief and shaking, tension releasing for one human heartbeat before reverence returned. She bared his throat where he had offered it and bit over his pulse. He shuddered under her hands, a low sound torn from somewhere ancient. His runes flared across both arms in molten lines, brighter than she had ever seen, and the force of the completed bond slammed through them together. His memory of centuries of command, loneliness worn smooth into discipline, grief for wolves buried under banners. Her years in infirmary smoke and herb dust, every dismissal, every stubborn act of care, every time she chose method over fear. None of it was erased. All of it was witnessed. In the new mind link, she felt his astonishment as clearly as her own. You stayed? His thought brushed hers. Not words exactly, but meaning with a pulse. You stayed and fought. She pressed her forehead to his. No more cages, she sent back through the bond, the phrase glowing between them with the force of oath. No more alone, came his answer, immediate and unguarded. Around them, knees hit stone in a rolling wave, not to him alone, to both. Marrow spoke the legal claim in formal cadence. Ilyan read the attestation of mutual marking and sovereign witness. Malin tied a clean strip of linen at Cordelia's shoulder, then at Xavier's throat, hands brisk and wet-eyed. Dane announced sentencing outcomes. Sarek stripped and remanded for tribunal labor in the northern quarries. The clasp reversal guards jailed pending exile, Dark Hollow assets frozen until neutral audit, and the cistern cleansed under healer supervision before dawn. The 2 letters taken from Vault 12 were opened publicly and entered into record, each bearing Genevieve's seal and payment instructions keyed to shift tampering. Every thread was named, none left loose. Xavier gathered Cordelia into his arms at last, not as possession, but as shelter given and received. They stood in the moonlit circle, breathing in the settled bond, her cheek against his chest, his hand spanning the center of her back, both of them shaking in the aftermath, and neither trying to hide it. 3 days later, in the same great hall where they had tried to break her, Cordelia stood on the dais in dark blue wool edged with silver thread, her healed shoulder marked and uncovered by choice. Xavier stood at her left, 1 step back during the decree reading, exactly as she had requested. Ilyan presented the finalized forensic ledger. Malin presented the healer code revisions. Marrow, stripped of his old evasions, read the constitutional amendments aloud. Healer autonomy from noble houses, mandatory public chain of custody logs for all medicinal stores, quarterly apothecary audits by mixed-rank teams, and sanctuary rights at every border post for accused omegas, outcasts, and foreign exiles pending evidence review. Xavier added the succession reform himself, voice carrying to the doors. Bond and demonstrated merit outrank bloodline bargains in crown continuity. Then Ilyan read Ravencrest's filed liability finding, accepted by proxy and bonded for reparations under joint jurisdiction. By sovereign notation, institutional betrayal was no longer an open allegation, but a resolved charge set on sentencing calendar. No one applauded at first. Wolf Courts did not trust Joy quickly. Then a kitchen runner, the same one who had testified, struck his fist to his heart. A healer followed. Then officers, then clerks, then benches full of citizens until the hall thundered with it. Cordelia knelt for coronation because ritual required it. Xavier did not crown her alone. He placed the circlet with Malin and Dane as co-witnesses from healer and guard ranks, while Ilyan sealed the record and Marrow signed without flourish. Luna Queen and Royal High Healer, Ilyan declared, by competence, by courage, by lawful bond. At dusk, they rode to the border post where it had begun. The old iron ring still jutted from weathered wood. Cordelia removed it herself with a hammer and handed it to Dane for the archive of abolished punishments. In its place, she hung a carved ash plaque bearing new law. Sanctuary first, verdict after evidence. When they reached the restored observatory infirmary, 2 fosterlings from the winter caravans were asleep by the hearth under quilts too large for their small shoulders, watched by Malin with a knitting basket in her lap and an expression of fierce contentment she did not bother disguising. Xavier set down a crate of clean jars. Cordelia set her herb knife beside the mortar, within easy reach, exactly where she wanted it. Night settled quiet over Stormborn Keep. In lamplight, their joined marks glowed faintly as they sat shoulder to shoulder at the long work table, reviewing tomorrow's clinic roster while the pack slept unafraid.